Reported my husband's mom for fraud after she demanded we file for bankruptcy over her debts, finally cutting her toxic control. I'm 27 and my husband is 29. We just got married, but we've been together since college over 8 years. For some background, I grew up in a big family. We weren't always well off, but we worked our way up to upper middle class, and my parents are still married. My husband, though, comes from a much poorer background. His parents divorced early, so he was raised by his mom, saw his dad once or twice a year, or when they happened to cross paths at the family cabin. Most days, he lived with his mom, her boyfriends, and his half-sister. From the very beginning, even a year into dating, my husband then boyfriend was clear with me he wanted to be serious and honest, with marriage as the end game. That meant he never hid anything about his home life. Or his finances. One day, only about a year in, he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. His mother, while he was still a child, had opened 4 credit cards in his name. I have no idea how or when exactly he figured it out, but apparently his mom always claimed she was paying them off. Naturally, I told him this was not okay, that he needed to get those cards and accounts under his own control. But he hesitated. Now, looking back, I know it's because he still lived with her at the time, and he definitely didn't want his mom to get in trouble or go to jail if he reported the fraud. Even so, understanding the struggles of his single mom raising 2 kids, I gave his mom the benefit of the doubt, but I didn't stop nudging him to, at the very least, keep tabs on those accounts. Every so often, I'd remind him to check in, and I now realize it was probably just me hoping he'd stand up for himself. The next year, he came to me and told me he had to file for bankruptcy. And this wasn't because of the credit cards, but rather something even stranger. When he was a toddler, his mother claimed he was severely autistic, and she started getting disability checks from the state for him, checks that continued until he was 23 or 24 years old. When I first met him, he earnestly told me he was autistic. I have a medical background, and I've worked one-on-one with adults who are on the autism spectrum. Honestly, I'm 95% certain my husband is not autistic. He definitely has AD, but that's not the same. Anyway, in his early 20s, the state started re-evaluating his case and kept sending checks while they investigated. You're not supposed to cash those during re-evaluation, but his mom, she didn't stop. A year later, the verdict came in and the state decided he should have never been receiving those disability payments. They wanted a whopping $20,000 repaid. The debt was in his name, of course, because the checks were for his supposed disability. I suggested they ask my mom for help. She has a strong background in law and finance. But my husband left things up to his mom. She helped him file for bankruptcy, and he believed the debt was gone. That's what she told him, and that's what he thought. Fast forward to our engagement and wedding planning in 2025. We were living together and it was time to merge finances. I brought up the old credit cards and the need to get accounts under control before we combine everything. He agreed, said he'd do it, but asked if we could wait until after the wedding. His mom was already making things difficult, causing drama around every detail, picking fights, even being outright hostile with wedding vendors. It was so bad that we even considered seriously disinviting her. Anyway, while we were working with my brother who was acting as our financial planner and figuring out how to consolidate debt, a colleague of his offered to help by pulling up our credit reports. Hubby and I knew my score wouldn't be amazing, but we expected his to be decent, like in the 700s, the way it usually was, despite everything his mom put him through. But what popped up stunned us. His score was down to 590. And the report's biggest red mark was $20,000 plus in debt. Just seeing my husband's body language in that moment, he stiffened. Barely breathing, I could tell he was unraveling inside. I watched him immediately text his mother, searching for answers. That's when we found out his mom never mentioned that the state was still sending collection letters about the debt. She just kept all the mail, never brought it up, and then told us again not to worry, declaring bankruptcy will wipe the debt clean. Suddenly, it all hit us. He'd never actually declared bankruptcy. She'd lied, kept quiet about the whole thing for nearly 4 years, playing with his future like it was some pawn in her own twisted chess game. At that point, I was livid. I called my mom. She used to help clients file for bankruptcy, so she knew the ins and outs. While my husband's mom blew up our phones, telling us to just file for bankruptcy, my mom calmly explained that doing so would destroy any dreams we had of getting a house or a decent car, not to mention the court fees and the messiness of multiple appearances, and the fact that this would tie us up financially for a decade. All the while, I could feel myself seething. His mother had the audacity to suggest we destroy our lives, put our future on hold, just to erase the debt she created. Those credit cards, that disability check fiasco, none of it even belonged to my husband. Not if I could help it. My husband slipped into a withdrawn, pain state. It was all beginning to sink in, just how financially abusive his mother really was, and just how irreparable her bridges were becoming. Every time he tried to give her another chance, she responded by burning down what little trust remained. He began comparing his experiences to his half-sisters. She got the preferential treatment, no fraudulent debt, no credit headaches, and the privilege to do gymnastics, where he only got the occasional summer pass to the pool. I was so thankful for my mom. She dug up all the paperwork needed to file an appeal with the state over the $20,000 debt, and helped my husband get everything together for the process. The appeals take forever, months, maybe even years, before the state reviews and makes a decision, but my mom is confident we have a good case. A few months after the wedding, my husband finally sat his mom down. He explained that we were merging finances and wanted a solid future, maybe even start a family in a couple years, and that meant we needed to have oversight on these accounts and credit cards. He asked her for the cards and the account details, saying that from now on, she'd have to pay him directly instead of running up debt in his name. She exploded. He never told me exactly what she said, but he did discover she'd been running credit checks on both of us. She even accused him of needing to stop me from opening new cards, as if I were the problem. And that's where I stand now, in this endless battle to untangle my husband from the financial mess his mother made, with her secret still unraveling and her sabotage becoming crystal clear. My husband came home one night, looking more defeated than I'd ever seen him. He told me his mother had said truly awful things to him about his flaws. The details he kept to himself, but he did share that she reminded him, in her own twisted way, that he was worth nothing. It shattered me to watch him carry this weight. He described how, after tearing into him, she began yelling vicious things about me too, though he refused to repeat any of it, wanting to shield me from her venom. That was the moment he finally had enough. He exploded at her, quit his job at her restaurant, and on his way out, told her that if she didn't give him those cards and accounts within a month, he'd report her for fraud. I had no idea he was planning to confront her that night, and only discovered what had happened when I received a text from him while I was at work. What followed was the longest silence I've ever witnessed between them, over 2 weeks without a word exchanged. Despite her being, frankly, a piece of work, they'd always had a weirdly close relationship, so this sudden rift stunned me. While my husband searched for new jobs, we decided to use one of his mother's own tactics. He applied for unemployment benefits to hold us over. I remember feeling both anxious and a touch rebellious about it. Then, about 2 weeks into the silence, his mom called him in tears, claiming she wanted to make amends. They spoke, but somehow, all those cards and accounts remained with her. Not long after, the angry text began. She was livid he dared to apply for unemployment and ranted about how it had cost her $300. My husband simply rolled his eyes and ignored her. If only she knew that was the last time she'd have to worry about it, because he landed a new job just a week later. The hours aren't ideal, but the pay and benefits are solid. Still, more than a month passed, and she held on to those financial accounts, likely still seeing her son as the timid, non-confrontational man she used to control. But marrying me and moving out had changed him, given him confidence and a spine she didn't expect. Finally, my husband did what he had to. He called the credit card companies and reported the fraud. The accounts have been shut down, and now she's under investigation. Only the law will decide if she ends up in jail. Between her cruel words, her sabotage around our wedding, and this terrible financial abuse, there's no coming back from this. We've moved to low contact with her, and honestly, I don't believe my husband's mother can ever repair the wounds she's inflicted on him. Lately, he's been spending a lot of time with my parents, who treat him like the son they never had. Some days, I swear, he's their favorite child. He needs parents who are genuinely there for him, who offer advice without any sneaky agenda. He's muted every channel of communication with his mother, so he can screen her messages without being overwhelmed when she eventually finds out and loses her mind. All that's left for us to do is sit, wait, and hope for a bit of peace. Update 1. I'm still a little anxious sharing what's happened, but I feel compelled to provide an update, especially since I'm the kind of person who always wants to hear how things turn out. In case you missed what happened before, here's the briefest summary I can manage. My mother-in-law financially abused my husband from a young age. She opened credit cards in his name and collected disability checks by falsely claiming he was autistic, all without his knowledge. He only discovered this at 18 when he started looking into his own finances, and his mother finally confessed. Condensing over 8 years of tangled, painful events into one anecdote was never going to cover it all, and honestly, some of the details are a blur, especially since I don't have a background in finance or law. Let me be clear, I never shared any of this to get relationship advice or critiques. I wanted people to understand parent-child financial abuse and the insidious emotional manipulation that comes with it. My husband grew up without real parental support. This year, With our wedding and when we started reevaluating our finances, the reality sank in more deeply than ever. Both of his parents have failed him, but at least his mom was physically present as a child, which is probably why it was so hard for him to even consider reporting her fraud. And one can see that growing up that way just makes a kid desperate for any scrap of love and leaves them wide open to being gaslit into thinking that abuse is normal. So here's where things stand now. My husband quit working at his mother's bar and started a new job that pays better, offers more hours, and even has proper benefits. After a late shift, he met up with my mom. She's a pro with numbers to compare his new workplace's benefits to mine, and she helped him finally report the credit fraud to the necessary companies. What he thought was only 2 credit cards turned out to be 5, with a total of $22,000 racked up in debt all in his name. That stung, especially since it meant his mother was likely still actively using those cards. He sent her one final text, telling her she'd had every chance and that he was reporting her to the credit card companies. Her responses were just as toxic as you'd imagine, accusations that my family was brainwashing him to cut her off, and claims that our financial issues were somehow my fault. It doesn't make sense. I make 4 times what he earned working for her, and I never took out a card in his name. He showed my mom the barrage of texts his mother had sent, and my ordinarily patient mother hit her limit. She wouldn't tell me exactly what was said, but I know that after reading those messages, she changed her stance from tolerate her in small doses to cut that toxic woman out for good. The fraud is now officially reported. The credit card companies have closed out the accounts and are investigating. From what my mom knows, jail time is unlikely because the individual debts don't break $10,000, but it will go on my Mills record. She'll be responsible for the debt, and she'll face fines. It shouldn't be hard to pin the fraud on her, as her contact info was tied to the card. As for the stolen disability payments, we're still in an appeal waiting period. The government wants back pay, but we're confident my husband's appeal will be approved since he provided all the right documentation. Whether that means his mother finally has to answer for the debt, or it gets forgiven, is still unclear. The process could take months to more than a year, so we're in for a long wait. We're now no contact with my mill. My husband rarely shows his emotions, but it only took a year of her abusive texts and manipulations for him to cut her off for good. He was at my parents' house when he finally blocked her everywhere. My parents, who have embraced him as family, hugged him the first time he's ever felt that from any kind of parent and took him out for breakfast to console him. My husband finally has loving parents in his life, and I'm incredibly proud to come from a family willing to step up and support others. Financial abuse and exploitation between parents and children isn't talked about enough. Victims often don't report it because they fear losing shelter or food, losing even the illusion of parental love, or disrupting other family relationships. It's an invisible kind of pain that deserves so much more attention, and I hope by sharing our story it helps someone else feel seen. Update 2. I watched the collar go out of his face in real time. He read the letter 3 times, then handed it to me with his hollow little laugh that wasn't a laugh at all. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. We hadn't told her our unit number when we moved, and he'd already frozen his credit. There was only one way to do this. She'd filled it out as him. We drove straight to the post office. We didn't even talk in the car, it was that clipped and necessary. The clerk at the counter pulled up the record. The request had been entered online, then verified with a printed form that someone had dropped off. The clerk didn't say her name, but she didn't have to. She tapped the screen with 2 fingers, and raised her eyebrows in that way people do when they can't legally tell you but they want you to know you are crazy. She canceled a forward on the spot and sent us to the little side office with the glass door to talk to the postal inspector. I didn't know there was a person whose entire job was mail crimes, but there he was, patient and very still, with a legal pad that had already seen some stories. He took one look at the bankruptcy comment on our intake sheet and the credit card case number and said he was going to open an identity theft report and tie the change of address attempt to it. Apparently, once you try to steal someone's mail while there's an open fraud investigation, it stops being messy family business and starts being a federal headache. He asked my husband to confirm which mail had gone missing. We hadn't realized anything had, not yet, and that might have been the worst part. It makes your skin itch to realize there are letters with your name on them floating somewhere you didn't send them. We left with copies of everything and a new layer of tightness between our shoulders. That same week, we got the notice we've been waiting for since spring, a date for the disability overpayment appeal hearing. It would be over video. A real person on the other end who would listen to my husband say, "I didn't know, I never got the money," and decide if he'd spend the next however many years paying back a debt he never asked for. My mom came over with her old banker's bag like she was carrying her briefcase into a courtroom. We laid everything out across our dining table, the forms he'd signed at 18 because she told him to, the deposit records showing the money never hit any account belonging to him, A letter from his old pediatrician that my mom had somehow charmed her way into getting, carefully worded and devastating, no diagnosis consistent with the one his mother claimed. I made tea no one drank. 2 days before the hearing, a new letter arrived, not in our box but slid under our door. My name wasn't on it. It was addressed to my husband, and the return address was the bar. Inside was a handwritten note on a napkin, because she dots her I's with little vertical slashes like a teacher telling him to stop the appeal because we can fix this as a family. There was also a single sheet of paper she must have meant to send to the state, a third-party authorization with my husband's name printed at the top and a signature forged at the bottom, authorizing her to discuss his case. She'd backdated it a month. She'd written our new address next to hers in 2 different inks, like she couldn't make up her mind which version of the truth she wanted to push. The morning of the hearing, we logged on early. They make you sit in a little virtual waiting room, which is somehow worse than sitting outside a principal's office because there's no clock to stare at, just your own face in a box and the quiet. When the judge admitted us, he did the whole script, very formal, very kind. A lawyer from the state was there, and to my surprise, he didn't come in swinging. He went through the file like a doctor before surgery, just confirming bones. Something flickered at the bottom of the screen, and then a new box popped up with my mother-in-law's name on it. She tried to join. My husband didn't move for a full second, just inhaled hard enough to lift his shoulders. The judge asked if he wanted her there. He said no. Simple as pulling a thorn from your finger, and just as sharp. The judge removed her from the room and put a note on file about unauthorized third-party attempts. The rest felt like being slowly exercised. My husband told them plainly, without drama, how she kept his documents in a locked file, how the checks went to her, how he only found out there was ever a diagnosis because she told him he had one. He said what I have watched him struggle to say out loud, that for most of his life, he thought he was broken in a specific way, and that the person who put that word in his mouth liked it better when he stayed small. Near the end, the state attorney asked a single quiet question that made me want to cry right through the webcam. Did you ever see the money? He said no. He said his mom told him she was keeping it safe. He said the first time he saw the word overpayment was when the letter came to our apartment, already past due, already tasting like a trap. They don't rule on the call. They tell you the window 30 to 90 days, maybe longer. We closed the laptop and my husband put both hands flat on the table and just breathed for a minute, forehead against the wood. I think he thought he'd break down. He didn't. He just stood up straighter. I wish that was the end of the week. It wasn't. That night, while he was on shift at the new job, his mother showed up. She didn't walk in like a customer, she posted herself near the host stand like a gargoyle and started asking for him by name, tone sweet at a level that makes the hair on your arms prickle. One of the bartenders texted me. I called the manager, who told me not to worry, that security would handle it. They did. She went theatrical, of course, hand on chest, almost swoon, telling a 20-year-old hostess that her son was on heavy medications and needed her. When my husband refused to come out, she started in on me. I wasn't there to hear it, but later he said he could tell from across the room because the hostess's eyebrows shot up into her hairline and the manager suddenly moved between them. They escorted her out. The manager wrote an incident report. It's ridiculous that I felt grateful for an incident report, but that's where we are. The next morning we went to the courthouse and got a temporary harassment order. You sit on a hard bench and write the whole thing out in a little box on a form that doesn't have enough lines, and then you see a judge for 3 minutes. My husband's voice went calm and flat the way it does when he's done being afraid. The judge read the page and gave him the order for 10 days, no contact, no showing up at home or work. A sheriff served her that afternoon. She violated it that night with an email from a brand new address that still had her full name in it because she thinks she's clever. We printed it, drove it to the station, and added it to the stack. Then, out of nowhere, his half-sister texted. She and I have always existed on different planets. We were polite at holidays. That one year we tried to make that work, but the message was clear and urgent. I have something you should see. Meet me somewhere public. We chose a busy coffee shop. She walked in with a manila envelope like a prop in a spy movie and sat down without ordering anything. I could see her hand shaking as she slid it across the table. I don't want any part of this, she said, not looking at the envelope, looking at her spoon. But she's going to take us all down with her if someone doesn't stop it. Inside was a photocopy of his social security card. A copy of his birth certificate. 3 pages of usernames and passwords in his name written in her handwriting and highlighted, like a study guide for committing felonies. A clipped stack of return address labels printed with his name and her address. And on top, Oz's change of address confirmation form with our apartment number scratched over in her PO box carefully printed, the signature at the bottom a shaky imitation of my husband's loops and slants. Tucked into the back was a typed statement she'd drafted to send to the state, full of lies about his supposed diagnosis and a section that made my eyes burn. I have always acted in my son's best interest as his representative. He cannot handle bills or appointments. He gets overwhelmed. I looked at my husband, who pays our utilities on autopay and planned our entire honeymoon spreadsheet down to the last train departure, and I thought, she has eaten the story she told about him so completely that she's choking on it. His sister wouldn't explain how she got any of it beyond she leaves things everywhere when she's mad and I can't do this anymore. She didn't want to be a witness. She didn't want to come to court. She pressed her lips together and said, I just need you to get out, and I realized that we were not the only people orbiting someone else's spiral and wondering when gravity would finally shrug us off. We took the folder straight to the postal inspector and then to the detective who has been handling the credit card side. They did not smile at all, which in this case felt like the best possible sign. The inspector kept the us fees form. The detective took photos of everything and asked if we'd consent to letting him subpoena IP logged for the online accounts. He looked at the forgery, then up at my husband, and said, levelly, this is a pattern. There have been these little wins that feel almost indecent to celebrate. One of the credit card companies formally moved the debt out of my husband's name. They called it confirmed third-party misuse, and then emailed us a notice that read like a release valve unclogging. My husband's credit score ticked up 5 points in a day. He took a screenshot of it and texted it to my mom with a single emoji period. At our place that night, my dad grilled chicken and my mom made a salad and my husband, for the first time in months, 8 seconds. It was so normal it felt like a gift. We don't have a final decision from the appeal, not yet. The hearing officer emailed to say additional documentation had been added to the file and to expect an answer within 60 days. Every time the phone rings from an unknown number my stomach still flips. But the silence from her enforced though it has been like clearing a clogged drain. We can't hear each other again. We can plan something further out than Friday. I caught my husband on the balcony last night, just standing there with his hands on the railing, looking at the courtyard lights. When I slid the door open, he didn't turn around, he just said, very softly, I don't feel crazy anymore. There's still the messy middle. There will be more forms and maybe another court date and probably one more awful surprise because that's how this has gone. But the story she wrote about him is losing its foothold. He's writing his own now, and it has actual chapters, things like benefits packet at the new job with his name on it, Sunday breakfast with my parents where my mom doesn't let the eggs overcook, a mailbox that only opens when we have the key. I don't know what the ending looks like yet. For the first time in a long time, I believe it isn't hers to decide. Update 3. The envelope was thin, which felt wrong. It had the state seal ghosted in blue that always makes my stomach flip, and his name typed so square it looked like it had been stamped into the paper. He stood with it in his hand and for a full minute like it might hum if he put it to his ear. He didn't. He sat on the kitchen floor instead and tore it open right there, knees up, back against the cabinet like the letter might knock him over. There was this murmur of legal words at the top and then the sentence that made the room get bigger around us, overpayment waived. Not at fault. Recovery against equity and good conscience. I read it once in a blur, and then again slowly, each comma its own breath. They cited the hearing, the exhibits, the bank records, the pediatrician's letter. No further collection action will be pursued against the claimant. He rubbed his thumb over those words until the paper went soft. I watched his mouth open like he might laugh and then nod. He put his forehead against my shoulder and made a sound I've only ever heard people make when pain turns into air. We didn't pop champagne. We sat there with our backs to the cabinet and ate the cold half of a roast chicken with our fingers and cried and then laughed because we were crying into poultry. My mom came over and read the letter 3 times and said very quietly, good, like a verdict. My dad hugged him in that big armed way fathers on TV do, and my husband didn't even try to make a joke about it. He just let it happen. The same afternoon, the detective called. His voice always sounds like gravel and late coffee. We got the logs, he said, and it took me a second to remember what logs belong to when you're not camping. IP addresses. Time stamps. The accounts tied to the cards lighting up from the bar's Wi-Fi during open hours and from her apartment after close. He said it like he was telling us the weather, but I could hear the satisfaction he didn't let touch his words. He asked my husband to come down to the station and sign an additional affidavit, clean up some time frames, and let them copy the new pile of nonsense his half-sister had slid across the coffee shop table. The manila envelope is now an expanding file with tabs. We bought it after realizing the kitchen drawer was starting to look like a crime scene junk drawer. There's a weird relief in owning the right kind of folder. The harassment order hearing was 2 days later, in a courtroom with pews too shiny to be sat on by people with soft lives. We went early and watched a guy in a suit try to talk over his own lawyer. The judge didn't look up, just lifted his hand like a crossing guard and the sound stopped. When our case was called, my husband stood straighter than I have ever seen him stand. She was there with a binder full of loose papers and a mouth already moving. She didn't have a lawyer, just her own certainty arranged in dividers. She tried to hand the judge a letter the way a kid tries to give a parent a drawing they made to get out of trouble. He didn't take it. He asked her one question at a time and told her to answer only that question. She tried to tell her whole life. He shut the binder between us gently but firmly with his questions. The manager for my husband's work had sent in the incident report and a short statement. The judge read, eyebrows tilting almost imperceptibly. When she said the thing about him being on heavy medications, the judge looked at my husband and asked, "Are you currently prescribed any medication which would impair your ability to understand these proceedings?" My husband said no. Simple. The order became a year. It covers our home, his job, my parents' house, anywhere he is. She made a noise, half scoff, half laugh that died in the carpet when the gavel touched wood. We were almost giddy in the parking lot, which feels terrible to admit. Not happy, not exactly. Just oxygenated. We stopped at a hardware store on the drive home and bought a locking file box and a deadbolt, even though our building hates when tenants put in anything that looks like permanents. He installed it that night with a screwdriver and a carefulness that felt like love. Then tax season hit the calendar like it always does, boring and predictable, and still managed to jump scare us. He sat down with his W-2 and a mug of coffee and the quiet conviction of a man who knows where he put last year's return. He clicked submit, and the screen went red. Rejected, duplicate social security number already filed. The rejection code looked like a hospital monitor going flat. He went very still again, and when he finally looked up at me I could see the flicker of old panic wanting a foothold. We didn't give it one. We drove to the IRS office with a folder, 2 IDs, and the kind of grim focus that makes government buildings almost look friendly. Inside, a woman with a bun so tight it looked like a marble took his affidavit and printed a sheet with a number that felt like a talisman. She put him in for an identity protection pin. "You'll get a letter," she said, and I hated that letters can be both bomb and bomb. The postal inspector called us the next day and used the word referral in a way that made my stomach try to learn new math. "He's looping in an analyst on the tax side. Patterns," he said again, and I pictured the legal pad of his with a spider web drawn in serious pen. This is a man who sees how strings pull. In the middle of all that, his half-sister showed up at our door with a backpack and the look of someone who hasn't slept in a bed she trusts in a while. I've never seen her without eyeliner wing sharp enough to hurt someone. They were gone. She said, "Can I stay one night?" And we said yes before the question fully landed. We made up the couch with a good blanket and the blue pillow he uses when he falls asleep watching soccer. In the morning she made coffee and sat on the floor and told us what broke her. Their mom had asked for her baby's social security number. Said she needed it for childcare credits, voice ear up thick, not quite making eye contact. It was a way she said just write it down and leave it on the counter, his sister said, eyes on her mug. She didn't write it down. She took her kid and a bag of clothes and got in her car. She's staying with a friend for now and looking at studio apartments that smell like old toast. She said she won't testify but she also won't lie. She hugged my husband at the door when she left and said, "I'm sorry," like she was apologizing for the weather. He hugged her back and said, "Me too." Pieces of family clicking into some other geometry. Small things keep happening that feel enormous. HR at his new job emailed him his benefits confirmation and I watched him read his own name on a plan description like it was a poem. The first of the credit card companies sent a letter that didn't even need a highlighter to be understood. Liability removed, accounts closed, derogatory marks scheduled for deletion. His score ticked up again and he took another screenshot and, this time, he texted it to me. No emoji. Just the number and a period and then, a minute later, I didn't think this would ever move the other direction. Last night, we got a call from the detective again early evening, before dinner, voice sounding almost like a real person and not just a badge. The DA approved 2 charges, he said. Identity theft and forgery. There will be an arraignment. We might get subpoenas. He spoke carefully, like he didn't want us to build a castle on top of this just yet. But when he hung up, my husband sat down at the table and said, in that even voice I'm still getting to know, okay. Not with dread. With readiness. There are words we get to say now without checking over our shoulders. There was one more surprise, and this time it came wrapped in blue tape with the words certified mail stamped in big unforgiving letters. It was from the State Liquor Board. We didn't open it, it wasn't ours. It was addressed to him only because of the mess that has been our entire adult life. But I took a picture and texted it to the detective, and 10 minutes later he called back and said, "Don't worry about that one. Different branch of the same tree." I think the unemployment claim he filed, the thing that felt like salt in a wound at the time, shook a few limbs. I keep waiting for the swing back, for the sick whiplash we have become accustomed to. It may still come. There's a court date we'll have to sit through, and I know her binder will be there, stuffed with papers she thinks are spells. But the story has shifted under our feet. The state wrote not at fault and it landed like a gavel. The judge said 1 year and her voice couldn't climb over it. The accounts are closing like doors we forgot were open. Even when the phone rings from a number I don't know, my whole body doesn't brace the way it used to. Tonight we ate on the balcony, because the air pretended it was spring for a second. There's a basil plant we bought on impulse that I keep forgetting to water, and it has somehow refused to die out of sheer stubbornness. He put his hand on the railing, looked at the sky turning that washed out blue-gray, and said, almost to himself, "It's quiet." Then he looked at me and said it again, louder, like a fact, "It's quiet." And in the quiet, the next thing is starting to take shape. Not a disaster. Not a trick. Just a life.